Good morning and welcome to this latest Zoomcast, as we're calling it. I'm John White, editor with Walls and Ceilings today, and joining me again is our friend Buck Buchanan. Buck had basically been involved in the EIFS industry since the early 80s. We all know him. And hey, Buck, it was real nice for EMA to give us a shout out recently to say, check out our previous discussion. I think I saw something come across this week. I don't know if you saw that, but I thought that was pretty cool that we certainly were recognized for our last discussion. And basically, Buck's book, Behind the Walls, it's basically Buck's account of the industry from 1969 to 2019. And welcome, Buck, and good morning.
Morning, John. Hope everything's well up your way.
Oh, it certainly is. It's summer and everyone's in a good mood, but it goes fast, doesn't it? I already feel like it's halfway over.
Oh, yeah.
Buck, after our last discussion, I think you and I debriefed on a couple things, and there's one thing you, I think, really wanted to emphasize that we didn't touch on. So why don't you kick off with that?
Yeah, we talked about a lot last time, but one of the things that I think is pertinent to today is how EIFS really became popular in the U.S. As compared to Europe. And when EIFS got started in Germany, it was started based and gained popularity based on the insulation aspect of it. Because at that particular time in Germany, fuel costs were really high. And so everybody was looking for ways to better insulate their buildings. And so EIFS was become very popular because of that. So the energy conservation aspect was really what got it going in Europe. Fast forward to 1969 in the US, well, gasoline in the US at that time, believe it or not, I know where we're talking, it was about 35 cents a gallon. So nobody was really interested in energy conservation because fuel was so cheap here. But what kicked EIFS off was the aesthetics aspect of it. All the creativity you could do, the shapes, the designs, etc., became very popular in the commercial sector as well as the residential sector. So I think if you kind of fast forward now 50 years later, now we're seeing where the energy conservation in this country is becoming a pertinent topic of discussion. And a lot of people are asking, how do we conserve energy? Well, one of the best ways is to use EIFS on your building to conserve the fuel concept consumed there, because about 75% of all electricity that's generated is going into buildings.
So on that point, though, that was always an emphasis that, I think the EIFS industry was trying to hit home with, but you just think it was falling on deaf ears because people basically, that just wasn't their concern because, like you said, gasoline was low. I don't know what the charges were in electricity for, what utility bills were like back then. But it's just, hey, why are we thinking about this? Was that the mindset?
Yeah, that was it. And again, the fuel costs were so inexpensive in this country, but today that's not necessarily the case. Plus, there's the movement on the green energy consumption. So, EIFS has really come to the forefront, and I think going forward, that EIFS has a lot of potential to grow based on its energy performance today. And when you compare that and couple that in with the aesthetics of it, I mean, you really got a tremendous product, and I think the industry needs to get out and beat that drum real hard right now.
So from our last discussion, we basically chatted about the early days and pretty much up to the late 80s, early 90s. So I'd like to start from there. But in the 90s, before the Wilmington issue, before all that just terrible things that afflicted the industry, how would you say the EIFS market was back then? Would you say it was up, down, level? Well, give us a basically a time stamp of what it was like.
Well, if you can look at the 80s and then into the 90s, you were really looking at a growth aspect of the business where there's a lot of growth. A lot of manufacturers were coming in to the business. And so it was a very dynamic industry at that time that companies were entering. I think we touched on this last time, over 40 companies got involved in the EIFS business in manufacturing those type products. And it became a real boom moving forward. And up until the mid 90s, there were a few drops up and down based on where the economy was, but it was boom. It was boom all the way through. So the growth mode really kind of continued through the 80s and into the mid 90s.
You know, one pivotal character that I don't believe we touched on last time was Steve Clamke. And Steve really had the unenviable task of basically defending the industry and in very public ways. I knew Steve, great dude, and he seemingly did a great job with EMA and a lot for the industry. And he always seemed to maintain his cool. And he certainly kept the association moving along. You knew him better than I did. What do you think was going through his head at that point? Obviously, it's a time of extreme stress, but he really had a great poker face. But are you comfortable speaking on behalf of him? What you think was going through his mind?
I wrote about him in the book. So, you know, Steve was, you know, he became the executive director for EMA in the late 90s. And at the time he came in was right when the Wilmington issue was all blowing up and East was under fire. So the board of directors determined that they really need to have a technical guy that knew the business well running the ship. And Steve went to Texas A&M. He had a degree in architecture. He was involved in testing when he graduated, did some architecture work, and then he ended up with Drive It and worked at Drive It for a number of years. And so he was a perfect fit because he was the guy that could go and talk to people because he had the credibility. Number one, he had an architect name behind his degree. So that gave him credibility. Plus, he'd been in the industry a number of years. So he had that from the experience side. And he was a guy that could come in and talk and had a calming way about him in the sense that he could deliver the message and he could convince people that he was, you know, he knew what he was talking about. So he was a guy that was able to do that. And so he had a run of about 10 years where he was dealing with many, many fires, as you may call it. So.
And with a lot of grace, I might add. You're absolutely right. He didn't strike me as a hothead. And there's a couple characters in the book that maybe we could make that argument that just didn't have the patience that Steve might have. So hats off to Steve. Last I heard, he's doing well in the Atlanta area. So do you know of his whereabouts? He's just enjoying life, right?
Yeah, he's in South Atlanta and just enjoying being out of the limelight. So, but there are a lot of funny Steve Clamke stories too. And one quick one is that when we were being in the middle of the fire, Dateline came to EMA. Dateline wanted to do a nightly show on the EIFS issue. So they were going to interview Steve. And Steve was sent up to our PR group, which was up in Pennsylvania at that time with a lawyer. They put him in a room for 3 days under a lamp. And they didn't put bamboo under his fingernails, but it was everything else. And they got him ready for the indoctrination and of what the kind of questions he was going to get from the Dateline reporter. And after 3 days, he got on a plane, came back to Atlanta, and he said, never been so glad to get back to Atlanta because he thought his head was going to blow up when he was up in Philadelphia. Anyway, long story short, he ended up that they interviewed him for about 2 hours. And then when the show came out on that Sunday night, he was on about 10 seconds. So anyway.
Yeah, that's a
Steve
shame.
got involved with that. He was also had his deposition taken numerous times, and he dealt with a number of the code officials, and really was the driving force to help get EIFS into the building codes. He led the technical group's effort and had a lot of help with it, but he was determined, I'm going to get EIFS in the building code first, and once I do that, then I'm going to retire, and that's what he did.
So moving along, can you tell the youngsters how the distribution model evolved over time? That's something you get into in the book, and it certainly has changed, but tell us how it was like then and what it basically morphed into.
Sure. When driving got started, obviously the first thing they did was try to sell direct. And Frank Marcelli recognized fairly quickly on that he couldn't employ a direct sales force nationwide, that he needed help. And he'd come from the brick industry, and so he was used to distribution models the way the brick people did it. So Frank said, well, let's do that with our EIFS business, and that way we can expand. And what he was looking for distributors to do at that time says, I need people to just go out and be disciples, and I need them to go out and sell. And so he was more concerned about distributors going out and making sales calls. And he looked at, I'll take care of the logistics side and the support side. You go out and get the orders, I'll fill the orders if need be. So he ended up with some distributors in the early days, many of them that didn't even have warehouses, but they would go out and make sales calls. They had exclusive territories. So their territory where they worked, they would reap the benefits of that. And they would go out and make calls on architects, developing specification, getting the applicators to sign up and do the work. So they did the sales work, and that's kind of where it started. Then, and so that starts in the 70s, it moves into the 80s, and by the end of the 90s, as the 90s came in, service was beginning to be more of a concern. Applicators didn't want to wait, a week before they got their order. They wanted to pick up material today to finish up a job. And so in the 90s, the tent machines became accessible at distributor locations. And once that happened, then you went from a sales model to more of a service model for the distributors. And therefore, the distributors were then being kind of asked to have warehouses, have forklifts, have inventory, begin to tent material, and have product ready available. So that started really in the 90s, and then it went forward from that point to where today you see that the distribution now has morphed into really a logistics business, because the drywall industry, the supply yards of GMS, FBM, and L&W now are the predominant distributors for each products. And that's because they've got delivery trucks, they've got warehouse space, and they've all come into learning how to tent. So you went from the beginning where it was sales driven to today where it is more logistics driven.
Should probably also add the trend, certainly in the early aughts, of acquisitions. Would you say that played a part? So a lot of your independent distributors basically they sold?
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly right. Is the distributors, as they begin to get out of the business, they begin to sell, and the companies that were, let's call it multi-state, multi-location distributors begin to buy these companies up because it was a good way for them to expand.
Now let's get on to yourself. Last time we really didn't get too much into your professional career, but certainly, Buck, you were in the mix and you were very involved. And what I know of you, you worked for two of the major players. I think you were in the job 12 months and you were on a plane to Germany. Just a lot going on in your life. And can you share a couple, few highlights of your professional history and just any stories?
Well, we could be here all day talking about those stories, and some of them I didn't even make the book. But the fact of the matter is when I got into business, it was in the 80s, early 80s. And I started as a sales guy, and I literally had to figure out how to sell the material because nobody could tell me. I went to work for Stowe, was one of the first sales reps hired outside of Vermont, where Stowe was headquartered at the time. And anyway,
didn't you give a presentation your first week on the job?
no, it wasn't the first week. It was about 2 months into it. So I was supposed to go with the sales manager at that time to Indiana to observe him give a presentation to about 50 architects. And I was coming from Atlanta and he was coming from New England. Well, he got snowed in. So I ended up having to give the presentation to the 50 architects. Luckily, in those days, I had this slide carousel, and I'm talking about the little bitty slides, not the PowerPoint presentation we have today. So I was very robotic and mechanical, but I made it through. And so that was learning on the job for sure. So that was early on. But that's a lot of what you went through in those days, because there wasn't, people were hired and said, just here's a binder. If you had one, didn't always have binders, go out and make sales calls. And you didn't know, have a clue what a sales call was. So you just kind of figured it out. So that was an interesting aspect. And then I started out getting specifications, and I got lots of specifications, but I wasn't getting the orders. And I finally figured it out. The architect told me, how many applicators do you have to bid on these jobs? I don't have any. So I had to go start finding applicators. So it was a learning process, but I made it through because I went literally from a sales rep to the national sales manager in 12 months.
And you're on a plane to Germany to meet with the top bosses over there for Stowe, correct?
Yeah, we were in those days. Stowe would send most of their people and a lot of their distributors to Germany for 2 weeks of training. And so while I was over there, I was near the end of our 2-week period, I was asked to come upstairs and meet with Fritz Stokemeister and the president of Stowe at that time, and the German sales manager. And they advised me that when I got back to the States, that I would be the national sales manager, and that I had 6 months to see if I could do the job. And I ended up staying there 15 years. So,
Of course, it worked out. Was that your first time leaving the country?
I had traveled as a kid some. I'd been to Europe before, so it wasn't my first time, but it was certainly my first business trip out of the country.
And the first of many, it sounds like, through the job.
Oh yeah, I mean, I kept the airlines in business. I was a $1 million miler on Eastern Airlines and almost a $2 million miler on Delta Airlines. So I kept the airlines in business for a long period.
That is. And my guess is today, you're not too eager to jump on a plane.
Well, I don't fly like I used to, but it still doesn't bother me. I mean, once you learn how to fly, you figure it out, and it's just like getting in the car. But it's a little more challenging today, and certainly the last couple of years have been. But and I don't travel like I used to. I've been on a plane twice this year, and I'm going to Europe in a couple of months. But anyway, not like I used to do. So,
Speaking of the 80s, let's back up here. But we've all heard the stories of just basically extravagant outings. I would hear of those when I started back in 2000, and at some point that obviously changed. The Reagan era, 80s of I think yuppies and the movie Wall Street and just the high life. It certainly seemed more prominent in the 80s, and by the 90s, those type of activities seemed to have cooled down. Do you think that was just unique to EIFS and construction outings, or do you think that's just kind of how other people in business, began to view things.
Well, I mean, the two martini lunch was alive and well when I got in the business world. So I think globally, it's speaking, all businesses dealt with that. And in construction in particular, it was kind of the way it was that, people did a lot of whining and dining and entertaining, and it somewhat became a missile race in the EIFS industry, and it was really driven by Frank Marcelli's desire to spend money while these fledgling companies were coming up, and he felt that was a way to kind of keep them down on a lower level, so to speak. And so Frank would have host distributor meetings initially, and then he started bringing applicators in, and once he brought the applicators in, he would have as many as 600 people at these meetings. So he spent a lot of money, and he would have it in very nice places. He would have tremendous speakers come in and talk, and he would make sure his people had a good time, whether they were fishing or they were playing golf or whatever they were doing. And so he didn't mind spending the money for those kind of events. And that was just Frank. Frank was that guy that would go out and spend the money and didn't mind doing so. And so he was a guy that wanted to do the promotions. He thought his distributor sales meetings were worthwhile, where he'd bring people in, he'd build customer loyalty to the point where applicators would, they were part of the club, and every year they wanted to be able to go back to Frank's show that he was going to put on, and also get a chance to win a Cadillac. So Frank didn't hold anything back. And then Frank, not only did he have the big meetings and do those kind of things, he spent money on advertising the Wall Street Journal. He actually brought out TV ads and had Peter Graves, who was very popular in those days because he was one of the lead actors on Mission Impossible, the TV show. And he actually ran television ads for about 6 months on The Week with David Brinkley, which is a very popular news show that came on Sunday mornings. So Frank didn't mind spending the money. And then other companies would try to do the same thing. I can speak when I was at Stowe, we tried to replicate some of those meetings, and we're pretty successful doing that. And Parks did some later in the time too. So it was just the way it was. But once Frank sold the business, then that kind of ceased. That kind of expenditure and way of spending money was greatly reduced. So the missile race, as I call it, had ended for spending the money. By the way, John, I want to just mention this while we're talking about Frank. Since the last time you and I spoke, Frank passed away. I think most people know that by now, but I talked to him about 2 weeks before he passed away, and he passed away last month. So
I was actually going to bring that up, and I'm glad you did, because this was kind of an interesting spring in regards to, a lot of your senior figures, and arguably two of the most senior figures, at least in how they spread the gospel of EIFS, and that would be Fritz at Stowe and Frank that you just brought up. Kind of makes me think of John Adams and Thomas Jefferson at the end of their life. And I think some biographer might have mentioned that Adams' last word was Thomas or something like that. So it's probably two head figures that had a lot of respect for one another. But did they have any type of relationship? Did they get along? Did they know one another?
I know they met. They had met before. I do know that. I don't know really beyond that. I'm sure they certainly knew of each other. I'm sure of that. But Fritz stayed in Europe, and Frank obviously stayed here. He divested his German business and really never went back once he did that. So, but I think they certainly did know each other. And again, I do know they met at one point in time.
Yeah, well, hats off to both of them. And
Right.
certainly, Buck, I want to again, congratulate you on the book and thank you for taking the opportunity to chat with us. It's been great getting to, I guess, learn more and just get kind of a good overall scope of the history of EIFS. I want to thank everyone for listening again. This is Buck Buchanan joining us, and I'm John Wyatt with Walls and Ceilings. Thank you so much, and until next time.